So yes, we do have some time for questions. And I had some prepared, but I imagine there are probably some on the floor, and we'd love to hear from you. Do we have 2 mic runners by any chance? Let's start here. With Molly, she's got a question. Ah. Do we have another one? Yes, okay. You've got one? Another mic? Any questions? Oh, we've got one here. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was you who talked about, is this working?
Yes.
Yep. Talked about 7 ways to protect the future. I want to add a further, one more principle, is it? One more way to establish the discipline of transition engineering to demonstrate and implement the technology of the future. 2 technologies. One is 100% renewable energy through native forest creation in cities, and the second is steam power, like steam railways, but steam engines, but 100% clean.
Thank you for your comment, Molly. Are there any questions? Just in the green? Did you have one? No? Or Jack down in the front here. That's fine. Sorry, I thought you were raising your hand.
Hi. Thanks each of you for your presentations. And as each of you know, I am very supportive of each of the initiatives that you've made. One of the questions that I always ask myself about initiatives to deal with the challenges that we have is one, can this particular initiative match the urgency in terms of the magnitude of the issue and the speed with which we are approaching tipping points? And I have a 2-part question related to that. I'd be interested in your reflections on dealing with the urgency, given that we have decades at most before we go to irreversible tipping points. And secondly, anticipating an inability to actually meet what we need to do. We talked about the difference between what's necessary and what's politically feasible, and that gap being so big. If we can't bridge that gap in time, what's our best option from a risk management perspective?
Very good. Do you want me to comment on that? So, Jack, brilliant questions. So, first of all, I'd have to say I'm a realist, and I'm not particularly optimistic. I think we globally have demonstrated our collective failure to protect the planet, and not just in relation to climate change, but biodiversity loss and multiple other things. And even as we speak right now, China is still building 2 coal-fired power stations a week. India is ramping up use of coal, and so on. So I think a reasonably pessimistic outlook for the coming decades is realistic in terms of a failure to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the rate that we really need to prevent crossing key tipping points, and therefore the likelihood that we will have some very, very severe impacts as we approach the middle part of this century and into the latter part of the century, and those impacts are going to be incredibly hurtful, harmful, and painful for humanity and, of course, for multiple other species. So, quickly, what I would say is that I think in terms of a sort of a plan B or plan C, we need collectively to be thinking very hard about how we survive what could be extremely challenging times. And I say we, I think that means globally, but also nationally and probably locally. And in fact, Gareth and I and Christina were talking about this at lunchtime, about actually thinking about establishing some sort of commission or group of people to do some really serious, hard thinking about how do we cope, because it will be coping in what is coming with supply chain disruption, food shocks, energy shocks, all manner of things. So I'm sorry, I don't want to be, full of despair or gloom, but I think we have to be absolutely realistic about what is happening globally and take cognizance of that and prepare for what we might say we hope not will happen. We hope it won't happen, but it's increasingly likely.
I think changes are inevitable, yeah. And we have another question up there. But I would just say briefly as well that with the urgency and the speed that things are changing, before we get the next one, how do we get a longer thinking, longer view on things when our politics are in such a short-term cycle? This is my question to you at some point, which maybe we'll not come back to.
With great difficulty. I mean, to me, one of the real failures of the current government is that it failed to seize the opportunity of multiple weather shocks to say to the nation, we need some big changes.
Yes.
And to seize that.
Yes.
To seize that opportunity. And instead, they're focused on, quote, bread and butter. I'm sorry, it's not as if that's unimportant, but this was a terrific opportunity and it's been completely botched.
Yes. And in light of that, seeing what's coming with the next election, what do we do? These are the big questions. Sorry, Catherine, over to you.
Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. So, my question is around, there's been conversations around creating new frameworks, new standards, to monitor and evaluate and all that sort of stuff, which is all fine and dandy. I get confused because we've already got an internationally agreed set of standards, the human rights framework, including business and human rights. The UPR for the Universal Periodic Review for New Zealand, for example, is coming up in 2024. And we've got the opportunity to put a microscope on Aotearoa and really grill them, doing shadow reports and interventions and such. So why are we spending more effort creating new frameworks when one already exists? Can you just sort of help me understand that? Because if it's already there, why don't we just, augment or adapt or backfill or something what's already there, and then we can put our resources and energy towards practical stuff and implementation of that? That's my question. Thank you.
Good question, Catherine. And I think that's the challenge. Is we've got all these different things: wellbeing budgets, wellbeing reports, living standards frameworks, different commissions and commissioners, human rights regime. The problem is it's not driving change. I mean, even the Climate Change Commission and the Zero Carbon Act could have been a foundation, but instead we see the Commission's advice actively ignored. They literally broke the emissions trading scheme the last year, and the budgets have been raided. So I think it's a problem that we've got all these frameworks, but they're not being listened to. They're not actually stymieing action. And just referring to the last question, I think. One place we shouldn't be looking to is across the road for Parliament, for leadership on these issues. Politicians have always followed movements and change. I'm yet to find an example from history where the elites in society altruistically said, let's just do the right thing because it's the right thing. It always happened because people fought, they agitated and campaigned, and that's our mission. And that's why I'm particularly hot on citizens' assemblies and participatory budgeting. We actually need to take the power away from them. And when you ask people, when you give them the evidence, you give them access to experts and advice, the ability and the time and the space to resolve these questions, I genuinely believe we will come up with the right answers. So that's why I'm particularly optimistic that we've got this tool that we could be using. Equally, a lot of these questions are questions for our local communities, particularly as we adapt to the effects of climate change. But, we've got in terms of the developed world, the OECD countries, second highest central government concentration of taxes. So we've got one of the weakest, most anemic local government sectors. We should actually be devolving power and resources down to communities who knows their problems best.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you.
Just to say, the current government has been centralising.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, health, tertiary education, water management, and so on. Now, that's not to say all that was wrong, but we've been going the other way, basically.
Yeah. Thank you. We have one more burning question at the top.
Kia ora. I just wanted to comment, I guess following along a little bit from what Gareth has said about politicians never following, or never leading, but rather following. And I guess what I would say is that none of these ideas are going to go unchallenged and uncontested. Right now we face the greatest threat of the rise of fascism than we've seen since the Second World War, right? And that, in the face of that, looks like climate change denial. We are awash in misinformation and disinformation in this country right now. And we've got really incredibly well-resourced active agents who are pushing a whole lot of ideas that people in this room would take as absolutely like the most obvious solutions, right? They're actively working against them, right? These things are happening in our communities right now. Literally at the end of this month, we've got people coming to town to protest against co-governance, to protest against a very confused idea of so-called Agenda 2030, which is effectively climate change denial. Protesting against things like being able to drive their own cars, and a whole lot of really confused and mixed up ideas. Better ideas are not going to win these people over, right? Like, we need people out on the streets. We need people out in our communities challenging this stuff and what is going on. We can no longer sit back. And I know lots of people in this room are thoroughly engaged in community organizing and community projects and fighting back. Like, believe me, I know we are all fighting really, really hard in lots and lots of different ways. But we have got to sew up all of the things that are going on in various different ways into those strategies of resistance. And I would say, please get out on the streets and join in resistance to the far right and the rise of these fascist ideas. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. We need to move to the next. Is it really urgent, Andrew? Urgent. I know, that's so true. I'm trying so hard to keep us to time.
Can I quickly ask Jonathan and Gareth in particular, a lot of the power actually resides in the public service and not with the politicians, in my opinion, have not had good advice. And you can't even really have any discussion internally about new economic thinking without being considered a maverick and insane. How do we change that? You got any thoughts?
How do we change that?
Just to say, Catherine's the one who's been the longest-serving public servant among us.
Well, Catherine then.
I think it's exactly the same way as Gareth has been talking about, that it's exactly the same way. Public servants generally aren't leading either. You know, they are brilliant, clever people. But they are also tapping into the zeitgeist, right? And so it's up to people like us to create that zeitgeist and to say, this is what we want to move to. The current economy is not serving people or the planet. We want a new one. Get on. Public servants, you serve the public. Serve us.
And the public needs to push the politicians and the public servants. And that's why we're here. That's why we're here, to try to really raise the profile of these issues and to go out and to just, make the urgency as noticeable as possible with the conversations that you're having. And, the people will push the leaders, and everyone needs to be really elevating these issues as best as they can. So thank you.